beautiful spot right now, huh? What's this place called?
Aldergrove Marsh.
Aldergrove Marsh. So I'm sitting here with Matthew Schmidt, who is the owner of the Tofu Shop, which has been around Arcata for how long?
1980.
1980. That's a long time. And I've been doing these series of films about local people, local business owners, but I was mainly focusing on, at one point I was focusing on the Wildflower Cafe. And I used to work for the Tofu Shop for about 2 years. I was a tofu maker. And Matthew Schmidt hired me and a bunch of other motley crew people to make tofu. And it's kind of funny is a lot of those people are still in Humboldt County because they showed up here and you gave them a job where they can work and establish themselves. And now I've run into about 10 people that worked for the Tofu Shop over the years, and they're all still here. And so thank you for doing that, because you gave us an opportunity, people with, like that might not have been hired because of one reason or another, but you gave them the opportunity to have a job, and they're still here. So I want to give you a certificate for that. I don't know what it's going to say on it, but all these names are going to be written on it thanking you for giving us a job. And it was a fun job, and it was really super hard work. And I want to talk about the tofu process, but I also want to talk about the Sprouted Seed, which was the restaurant before the Wildflower. It was called the Sprouted Seed. And when I was talking with you, you said that you worked there. So can you tell me a little bit about the Sprouted Seed?
Sure. I first visited the Sprouted Seed before I had moved here and before the Tofu Shop, visiting my sister. And I went there for lunch, and I met the owners and the founders of the Sprouted Seed. Their names were Brian and Deb. And they were the ones that developed the tofu tahini dressing recipe. And they grew sprouts right there in their kitchen. And I was a vegetarian, and I was impressed with what they were doing. When I ended up moving to Arcata in 79, I went there and applied for a job. And from the fella named Chuck Horn, who purchased the Sprouted Seed from Brian and Deb, he had no restaurant experience. I had some, and he hired me as a cook. And I worked there for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and as a dinner cook. About the middle of that period, I rented a shop space nearby and started to set up the Tofu Shop company. And I had a little bit of tofu experience. But while I was setting that company up, I continued to work for the Sprouted Seed.
Okay, and how did the Sprouted Seed do as a business?
Well, back then, it was like the only vegetarian type restaurant in town.
Okay.
And they used to do pretty big dinners. All the tables would be full. And in terms of cash revenues at the end of the day, I'm sure back then it was a lot smaller than it is now.
Yeah.
But it was a cool place to work.
And it was strictly vegetarian.
Yeah, vegetarian. Yeah.
And was it like, now it's cuisine? Was it just really plain and simple, or was it like, did they have like a menu with the same things on it every day, or?
Yeah, they had a fixed menu.
Mm-hmm.
And burritos. They had these plates of veggies on top of rice or on top of potatoes.
Yeah.
And then they had a little baking scene happening in there too. It
Okay.
wasn't so much of a bakery as it is now.
Right.
But it was a great place to work, and I made some great friends there.
So that was started in
I bet they opened the Sprouted Seed maybe in 75,
75.
something like
Because
that.
I have some photos of Melanie tearing down the inside, gutting the whole inside of the building and rebuilding it. Because there was like wooden plastic paneling up, and there were shelves with plants on it and stuff. And she stripped all that stuff out. There used to be a little display windows on either side of the door when you went in, and that's actually where you could have seen, very lightly etched into the window, you saw Northtown Books. When you looked from the inside of the restaurant out towards the sun, you could see it really faintly. So it was Northtown Books before. Do you remember that?
That was before my time.
Okay.
But, I knew that they had been in there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very historical place. In fact, one day, a woman about 60 poked her head in the back door, and Melanie and I were in there, and she's like, "Oh, can I help you?" And she goes, "Oh, I used to work here as a teenager when it was a bakery, and it was owned by," do you remember the names of the people that?
I think I do.
Dig deep.
It was Clara and Floyd Tatman.
Okay, yeah. So that's a missing point in the story about the Wildflower Cafe.
I can fill that in a little bit.
Yeah. What was that?
Well, after I left the Sprouted Seed and was working 100% tofu shop, I was able to rent a little cottage in the alley across 16th Street from the Sprouted Seed. And in that house that's still there was a 90-year-old woman who was housebound that lived in there, and she was my landlady for that little cottage that I rented. And I got to know her. Her name was Clara Tatman, and she told me that she and her husband Floyd used to have the bakery where the Sprouted Seed and now the Wildflower is. So yeah, that building goes way back.
Now, did they own the big tall building one street down on the corner? That's all kind of dilapidated now and being rebuilt.
Oh, that motel?
No, the house on 16th, 1 block down. It has a big fence around it now, like a chain link fence.
I don't
No?
know. Yeah.
Okay.
They just had that corner house.
Okay.
And at that point, G Street was the main road.
Right.
To Crescent City.
Right.
And it was dirt.
Wow.
And she said that she and Floyd used to bake all the wedding cakes for Humboldt County. And so that was great meeting her.
Amazing. And I also, when that old woman poked her head in through the back door, Melanie invited her in because she wanted to just kind of take a look at it. And she looked around. She was like, "Oh my gosh, that old bread slicer's still here. And some of the equipment was still there." And then she walked around. She told us what was where and where there was a cabinet and this and that. And then she said that every Sunday people would line up and to get fruit pies. Every Sunday, a huge line of people. And I thought that was really interesting. She was probably about 65 or 70 when she poked her head in through that back door. And a lot of people have poked their head through that back door. And it's pretty amazing. It's a historical spot. Now, the Sprouted Seed, it's the guy that bought it. He didn't know how to run a restaurant. So do you think he did a good job, or?
Yeah, I think he did a pretty good job, kept the place going.
Mm-hmm.
He was in there working all the time.
And what about the hiring process?
Well, he hired, I don't know about his process, but there was a great crew of people who worked there when I worked there. And, they had a they were a group, they all became friends and had a social life together outside of work.
Yeah, the Wildflower has always been like that. It's always been a very loving, shared companionship thing. Like there was a bonding there. I don't know why or what, but the place has always drawn really interesting people to work there, and they've always been friends. And some people come and go, and they don't fit in, and that was one of the things that I talked about with the restaurant was just the process of running a place and the continuation of that restaurant being there now over that period of time, over 38, almost 40 years. Now, and then you established a tofu shop, and I remember you telling me that when you started making tofu, you were just using a blender, like a.
Oh, actually, before I moved to Arcata, where I learned to make tofu in Colorado, we started with a blender. Yeah,
Just a blender.
a blender that we bought used at a yard sale.
And you went through several of them.
Oh yeah, we just plowed through those blenders, and we just had a pot on top of a conventional range. It was and handmade wooden pressing boxes. When we opened the tofu shop in Arcata, we actually had a little larger kind of a mill with steel plates for grinding the beans.
Yeah.
So we took it one step up.
Right, you stepped it up. And Melanie actually started her bakery in the back of.
Actually, she started up up front. Yeah.
12th Street Bakery or something like that.
Well, she started up front baking for the tofu shop, and then, excuse me, she ended up renting the back of the building that was empty, and we moved ovens back there, and then she started her own business called the 18th Street Bakery.
18th Street Bakery, yeah. And she told me that she's just had so many people coming through the back door to buy bread that she thought, wow, I can actually open up my own storefront and do this. And it became the Wildflower Cafe. And the tofu tahini, when you mentioned the tofu tahini and the date bars that she made basically kept the business going because it became a mainstream. The date bars went all over Northern California. She mass produced them, which were really good, and they're not made anymore. And the tofu tahini is still around, still famous, still a primer for all the food that goes at the Wildflower Cafe. And now that you have the tofu shop, you relocated, because I remember that place. You used to have a little walk-in, you can buy a tofu burger or the tofu charlotte and all these other things that were really good. And I knew the people that worked there, Jamie and that English woman, I forget her name. Elizabeth, yeah.
She still works.
She's still around. She still looks exactly the same.
Works at the co-op, yep.
Actually, you look the same too. I mean, the only thing that looks different from you is there's gray. But I'm always amazed. Like, I think tofu is a magic food if you're an example of a tofu eater, because you look pretty much the same as I've known you, like all these years. You look.
That's good or bad, I don't know.
Yeah, like maybe you signed in with the devil and gave you eternal life or something. Now, tofu is a very special product. And how much tofu do you make a day?
Currently, we make about 1,000 pounds a day.
1,000 pounds, and that goes all over.
Well, it's primarily in Humboldt County, but we do ship down the coast.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Because when I worked there, we used to do rounds, and we did 12 rounds. So we were making 1,200 pounds of tofu a day, and it was nonstop. It was a process that it started at 6 o'clock in the morning. We called it the grind. We grind the beans down into the kettle and boil them. You got to spray it down to make sure that thing doesn't boil over, because if it boils over, then you have to clean the whole pot inside and outside. And you thought that when you were done with your day that everything was clean, and when everything dried, you could see every single spot that you missed. And you had to do it again. And you had to clean all the buckets. You had to clean about 100 buckets and stack them up so they dried perfectly, and then turn them over so they dried perfectly, and then stack them up. And man, it was a process, non-stop, and it wore my body out. But it was fun. We learned Tai Chi to learn how to keep our bodies strong and to keep the motion, because there was a lot of activity and motion. And how long did it take you to perfect that cycle?
Oh, well, it just evolved, as demand grew, and we started needing to produce more. I don't know how to answer that question. It's still evolving.
It's still evolving.
But there are basic steps in making tofu, no matter what kind of system you have. You have the soaking of the beans, the grinding of the beans, the cooking of the slurry, pressing out the soy milk from the slurry, then curdling the milk
with nagari.
with nagari, and it separates into curds and whey, and then pressing the curds into blocks.
And then cutting it and packaging it.
Yeah, cooling it and packaging it.
Yeah, it was.
Well, you'll remember a lot. Yeah, that's great.
Oh, I could still do it. I noticed that now you have a kind of a different system where we used to have to climb up some steps to get to a rack that was hovered over the kettle. You had to spray down this big old hose that you had to spray down, so when it was cooking and didn't boil over, which was always like kind of crazy, like timing and listening. And there was a lot of listening for certain sounds. And I noticed now you have the kettle on the floor, and there's only one person doing it, right?
Well,
or you have two people.
We have three people. Yep. We've got a, well, the kettle's on the floor, and we use a pump instead of gravity feed.
Yes, exactly.
Which is a great improvement. But we have the three positions. There's the grinder, we call him, that grinds and cooks and presses out the milk. Then the curdler steps in and curdles the milk, presses the curds into blocks, cuts them and drops them in the cooling sink.
Right.
And then the third person, the packager, steps in and packages the things.
And you still make the patties, and you mix the extra firm tofu.
Yep.
And the extra firm tofu, what's the process for that?
Well, we use a different coagulant instead of nagari, which is magnesium chloride and comes from seawater, and is Japanese style. We also use calcium sulfate, which is the same as gypsum. It's mined from the earth, but we use pharmaceutical grade, and that's more Chinese style. But you're able to get a little firmer tofu.
And you press it longer.
You do press it a little longer. Yep.
And the whey was actually, I used to eat the tofu before it was pressed, and it just had a different flavor to it. And I used to bring it home to my daughter, who's 30 now, and she used to chow that stuff down, just like the whey and the tofu, the soft tofu. Yeah. It was so good.
Yeah, that unpressed tofu is called kinogoshi.
Kinogoshi. And you used to make this stuff called, well, this tofu charlotte I remember, which was really good. I still could taste it. But you also used to make the sweet drink.
Oh, yeah, we didn't make that.
Oh, you didn't make that?
You're thinking of amazaki?
Amazaki.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that stuff.
Yeah.
I wish someone made it now. The company that made it was in Emeryville, and they went out of business.
Yeah, that was delicious.
Oh, man.
We used to sell that in our little grocery in the tofu shop.
Okay, people out there in the internet world, if you ever want to taste something really good, try amazaki. And also try Arcata tofu style tofu made at the tofu shop in Arcata, California. And we're actually near a pond that was kind of nearby where the factory is. And as you can see, Humboldt County is not a desert. There's lots of going on here plant-wise. And have you ever thought about, when do you think is the time that you're going to think about closing the shop down? Has that ever come into your head?
Well, I think about probably hanging up my apron at some time.
Right, and then selling the business.
Hopefully finding somebody that could step in and keep it going.
Now, I have a series of questions I ask, and I've kind of stepped away from that today, but one of them is, who are you? And you mentioned that, you're Matthew Schmidt. And why did you think that you could start a tofu shop business?
I just was fascinated with tofu making when I learned how to do it. And I was at a time in my life I was kind of in between things and just looking for something to get involved with. And when I learned how to make tofu, it just grabbed me. And I liked the history of tofu, and it's thousands of years old. And I particularly liked it because it was a protein alternative, because I wasn't eating meat. And also at that time in the mid-70s, tofu had just really been introduced all over North America.
Right.
and these little tofu shops were springing up all over the country. So there was a kind of a community
Mm-hmm.
of tofu people,
Yeah.
and it was real exciting to be part of that.
There's a tofu shop in Sacramento that's been there since the 40s, I think. And it's like really nondescript. It has a little shop, little sign that says tofu, and you go down into this like really old building. It's not there anymore, but when I was a kid growing up there in Sacramento, I used to always see it. A big Japanese population there and a big Chinese population, but this was a Japanese company. And I never saw the process, but I'm sure it's very similar. How does the old way compare to the new way in making tofu?
Well, for us, I think it's pretty similar. Just because we're kind of an artisan company, we're kind of rare these days. Most of the big companies now are automated,
Yes.
and they use a little more developed technology. Instead of cooking in a big open kettle, they pipe the slurry through pipes and inject it with steam, and they, instead of doing batches, they have continuous flow, so it just is running nonstop.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of old-fashioned in that respect.
That's good, and you kept it that way.
Yeah.
You evolved a little bit, but you pretty much kept it. You probably kept up on the production part of it, is like making it more efficient, but you kept it pretty rootsy. And do you ever eat the wildflower anymore?
Oh yeah.
And what do you think of it? What's your perspective on the place?
I love the wildflower. Actually, I don't eat there a whole bunch, but I get food to go quite a bit. And the thing I like about the wildflower is the way it has maintained itself over the years, especially since Melanie purchased the sprouted seed and converted it into the wildflower, that the owners that have changed over the years have been people that work there.
Exactly.
And to me, that is so magical.
It's very magical.
I think we're on so Melanie was the first generation, and then Connie, and Pat and Darcy, and now
Sue and Jay.
So that's 4 generations.
It's amazing.
It's just so inspiring.
That's why I made these films, because I'm still blown away. And I worked there as a dishwasher through 4 of those owners for a 20-year period. And the place is still magical, and I just want to promote it. It's 16th and G Street in Arcata, California, and it's right on the corner there. Wildflower Cafe, look it up. And I just want to finish this interview with another WH word, is whatever you want to say to finish this story up.
If you haven't had that tofu tahini dressing, get some.
Yeah. Or the tofu made by the Tofu Shop in Arcata, California.
That's right. Yeah, we made the tofu.
Yeah, you made the tofu for it. And I used to make the tofu tahini. For 2 years, I made it. Big, huge batches of it. And I'm one of the few people that know the recipe. and I go to people's houses, and they're like, you know the recipe for tofu tahini? What is it? I was like, I'm not going to tell you. I can tell you some of the things that are in it, but I'm not going to tell you exactly, because I've seen other people try to duplicate it, and it's not the same. And I've noticed that. I've seen tofu tahini at other places, and I'm like, eh. And even there at the Wildflower, when I taste it, I could tell you something's missing, or that they didn't do something right. And every once in a while, I'll say, like, did you guys taste this? Like, because you don't want to lose the original concept of the stuff. And that's what happens with businesses, is the original people that established it move away, and then they just continue making that product, but they've lost the contact with its original being. And it starts to change, and they don't know it because they don't know what it tasted like before. And so it's very important that tradition to pass things down verbally, just like the art of making tofu. I mean, thousands of years, correct? And you get your beans from where?
Our beans, right now, they're from the Midwest.
Okay,
I think probably Iowa, this batch we got.
because I remember they used to come from Minnesota.
Right, we did buy beans from Minnesota.
Yeah,
Yep.
but they're organic.
Back then, that was before certified organic.
Oh, okay.
But we found a farm in Minnesota that had their own internal standards. It was called Living Farms, and they would provide you with a certificate of authenticity. So it was kind of a rare place.
Wow.
But now,
Okay.
of course, you can buy organic soybeans.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for doing this interview. It filled in some gaps about the sprouted seed and the previous owners, the bakery owners, and your connection with it, which is quite fascinating, and your contribution to Humboldt County with making tofu, because a lot of people love the tofu, and you're the one that's doing it. And thank you so much, and thank you for hiring me. I had a little kid then, and I worked at the Wildflower Cafe, and I also worked at the tofu shop. So I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning from my job the night before, getting home at 11 o'clock at night, grabbing some sleep, and then I'd ride and open up the tofu shop at 6 a.m. and start the grind. And then sometimes I'd go to the Wildflower to finish up my job and continue doing dishes. It nearly killed me. I had a nervous breakdown at one point because it was just so much work and so much responsibility. But having kids changed my life and made me who I am today, because it made me really think about what I was doing with myself and how I'm going to support this family. And so again, I thank you for hiring me, and about 30 other people that you hired. In fact, I had a baby with one of them. My son Robert came from Aubrey Cousseau, and she became my partner, and she worked at the tofu shop as a baker. And like I said, I know 20 or 30 people that worked at the tofu shop, and you hired them. You gave us a chance. We got to listen to reggae music all day, and you were a great boss. And that's what we need in this world, is people that are understanding, and reggae music that spreads love, and tofu that spreads health, and in the Wildflower Cafe, spreading the vegetarian cuisine still to this day in Humboldt County in Arcata, California. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And give a big wave to the universe for me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.